to an interview. I had pre-recorded that interview with my friend Kasper Carstensen. He's from Denmark, and he's going to be sharing some really incredible stories of his testimony. So he used to be a trained chef and personal trainer, and he has some really incredible stories with God. I really hope that you will enjoy his testimony, his stories, and that his testimonies will bring you closer to God and more trusting in God. Let us know what you think about that interview after it ends. I would love to hear your feedback. And in today's show, I have the privilege and the honor to interview one of my friends from Denmark, my friend Kasper Carstensen. Thank you so much for joining us for today's show and for sharing a little bit of your journey with God today with us.
Yeah, thank you, Joseph. I'm very excited to be here.
Very exciting. So, Kasper, tell us a little bit about yourself. You're wearing a special clothes today. It looks like you're wearing chef's clothes. Does it have anything to do with your profession?
Yeah, actually, I'm working at a culinary school in Sweden, run by the Adventist Church, in cooperation with the Adventist school there, and we have this amazing program where we train the next generation of chefs. And since we're doing 2 programs per year, 3 months, and then I have 3-month vacation, I decided to come visit some good friends of mine, you and your wife, who runs a food pharmacy. So I had the privilege of serving and helping out at food pharmacy in Newcastle for the last 2.5 months. It's been such a fun journey. It's been a big blessing to be part of the team and to see how people are being served in the community through something as a cafeteria, as a cafe ministry. So it's been a really fun journey.
Thanks for that. It's great to have you here on board with us for sure. And I want to know more about this background of yours as a professional chef and how that played out in your life and your testimony. But I also heard that you were a physical trainer. Is that also true?
Yeah, that was my first education after high school. I had a very big passion for sports and I love strength training. So I decided to be a personal trainer. So I studied this for 1 year. And this is also where I got my passion for teaching. I realized that quite early on. So I've been working for the Danish Sport and Olympic Federation for about 4 years, training trainers and athletes, giving courses, and being part of an educational team. So that has been really fun, and that has helped me to both learn more about myself, but also about health and how to train others. So that has been like a big impact where I could see God was just preparing me for different adventures and different work in the future. So
that is very exciting. Well, working for the Olympic and professional athletes in Denmark, you must have met some pretty incredible people there and very high performance athletes, I would imagine. So, Kasper, tell me a little bit about your Christian experience. So, have you always been a Christian? Did you grow up in a Christian home? Can you tell us a little bit about your background as far as your faith journey goes?
Yeah, so my parents became Christians when I was quite young. It started all with my older brother who came home from school. We had Christianity in Denmark. It's part of the normal classes. And he came home and he was like, had a lot of different questions. And my parents just looked at each other and were like, we would actually know this for ourselves. So they started to go to this non-denominational church. And one day they got a letter in the mailbox, and this was a Bible gift plan. And so they could sign up, and then they would get a free Bible. They would get Bible studies, and learning how to read and understand the Bible. So they were like, yeah, we really want to do this. So this really nice elderly Adventist pastor came to my parents' home. He visited us. He would give my parents a study, and he would always have this incredible, nice children's story for my older brother and I. So he became like a big part of our family. Me, my brother, were always looking forward for the next story he would tell us.
So how would he tell the stories? Is it through books, or had presentations, or just like telling from his voice?
Yeah, just telling by his voice. So he was incredible in storytelling. So it was just like being there, and you could see like his passion, and he was like very sincere. You can tell when somebody's sincere, and he was definitely a sincere person.
That's very interesting. So you grew up in this Christian home, and how was was it your faith growing up? Throughout your teenage years, throughout your young adulthood, did you hold on to that faith of your parents that was introduced to you by this elderly pastor, or did you ended up losing focus for a while?
Unfortunately, like a lot of young teenagers, I started to lose focus as well. I started to party, I started drinking, and that was where I started to fall astray, and I stopped going to church. And one day I had a falling out with my friends, and that led me to realize that I was going down a rabbit hole. I needed to have my life back in order again. And so I decided to go to the Adventist school as part of the board. So I decided to go to the Adventist school there as a student, but also to live there since it was also a boarding school. And this was where I got my faith again, and also where I started to have studies, and this is where I decided to be a Christian myself. So I had the Bible studies, and the following year I decided to be baptized.
Okay, so that happened at around your late teenage years, high school years. And how did that play out? Because you were getting into the world of Olympic athletes. You're getting to the world later on as a professional chef. How did your faith play out in those two things? Because there's a number of things, particularly as you mentioned, you were a Seventh-day Adventist. So there are things like the Sabbath, or for example, Seventh-day Adventists, they follow the Levitical instructions for nutrition in the book of the Bible as well. How do these two things kind of start to play a role into your life as you started to develop yourself professionally?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you for asking that, Joseph. To start with, after high school, I decided I was on a crossroad. I was considering either to study theology, to be a pastor, or to be a physiotherapist. But since I had this big interest in the human body and in sports, I decided to go down the road of being a physio. So to be able to do that, I needed to improve my grades, since my grade from high school wasn't the best. So I decided to do this elite course in strength training. And I came from this very strong faith environment, being at the Adventist school there, where all of a sudden I was the only Christian. I was the only Adventist there present. So I just asked the school to cater for my needs, since I didn't want to eat anything against the Levitical laws. So the school catered for that need, and that created a lot of curiosity about me, and I got some opportunities to share and to talk about my faith. But I also saw that my faith started to crumble, because what was normal there, unfortunately, was drinking and being by yourself and not having a strong identity in the Bible. I started to drink again, and I started to be more loose in certain areas. I still went to church, and I still had this as a priority, but I could see that I was allowing backsliding to be part of my life again.
Wow, and it is an amazing thing, because oftentimes we actually hear testimonies about getting away from the Lord for a while, but then coming back, and I came back and I stayed. But what you're saying is that there's like a rebound where you had you're having a blossoming faith when you're young. Then that did not become a priority to you, and then finally it becomes a priority to you again. But later down the track, you saw that slowly slipping back into particularly the habit of drinking. So what happened in that, during those years that yes, you were still attending church, but at the same time, this relationship with Jesus was not your first priority anymore? What developed from there?
Well, afterwards, I was still trying to figure out what I should do. So I got accepted to the school to study to be a physiotherapist. And after half a year, I decided to end this course, because it was hard for me to catch up with all the studies. Later on, I learned that I was dyslexic. So this was why studying and learning, memorizing Latin and muscles and everything by heart was so difficult for me. And this was also what led me to an identical crisis. And I see now, as I reflect back on my life, because I wasn't rooted, because I didn't have this strong Christian identity that allowed me, or that led me to go back on certain temptations, and also why I was starting to backslide. So because I had this idea that you have to have an education, you have to be somebody, you have to have a job, otherwise in life you're a nobody. And now I was like trying to figure out like, who am I, like what can I do? And then later on I decided to study at culinary school, because I learned through work experience I was quite good at cooking. I had a natural talent for that. And as I went to culinary school, I got amazing grades, and I was lucky enough to find an apprenticeship. But because of my low self-esteem, this was where I started to compromise. I didn't go to church because I was going to work instead, and this was my priority. And I saw that my relationship with God became smaller and smaller, and I distanced myself. But when you are in the middle of it, you don't realize it yourself. Like you think, oh, I'm all good, everything is fine, this is normal. But it's just because you have this big delusion, because you have become so far away from God that you don't realize it yourself. And this became, unfortunately, my reality.
That is very interesting. And you mentioned here, so after this gradual falling backwards, this getting away, slipping from the hands of Jesus, you mentioned one word here that caught my attention a few times, which is the word identity. So what changed, what happened that made you say, you know what, I have to put Jesus in the first place again? And what were some of the decisions, perhaps difficult decisions you had to make so that you could get back into following the steps of Jesus?
Yeah, I had this incredible experience, and I believe God was pulling all the strings because he knew exactly what I needed and who could lead me to the right path again. And so my director at the restaurant, he wanted to give us all a very generous Christmas gift. He wanted to give us a trip to Iceland. We just had to pay a little bit ourselves, and he would take care of all the rest. So he got some donors, and he got some sponsors from people we would buy products from, because he wanted to increase the level of the restaurant where I worked. And so we had a very tight schedule. We're doing a lot of things, but on Sunday we didn't do anything. And so I have some very good friends at Iceland. They're at the same age of my parents. They used to study in Denmark, and then they went back to Iceland for work. And so they invited me to their home for breakfast. And after breakfast, the man there, he invited me out for some sightseeing. And I was like, yeah, because Iceland is such an incredible pearl of nature. And he showed me all the cool places where tourists usually don't know, because it's a bit more rural and you have to have a good, strong car to be able to go there. So he drew me to this incredible place. Just imagine you out at the ocean, and you have these two massive rocks out there, and you have massive waves just throwing themselves at it. On top of there, about 10, 20 meters above, you have a lot of like small nests where you see puffins having their nests, and they would be like flying in, flying out, taking care of their little puffin babies. And we're just standing there for a little while. You have this landscape of black lava stones all around you. You had like a tiny geyser that's blowing off some steam.
Wow.
And so in that moment, he changed my life literally. He asked me one question, and this one question, which I'm going to share now, changed my distortions. He asked me this very simple question: Kasper, isn't it difficult to keep the Sabbath when you are a chef? And that resonated with me. And so the Bible tells us that the Holy Spirit will bring conviction to our hearts. And that was what that question did to me. I became super embarrassed. People who know me like you do, I'm very quick at like commenting, and giving like a punchline back. But here I was quiet as a lamb. Like I had no response. I was so heavily convicted.
And it was a very normal question.
It was,
wasn't it? He would say, hey, how do you reconcile the two? But the hard thing was to admit to yourself, I'm not reconciling anything. I'm just not keeping this habit. It's not that it's hard. It is hard. That's why I'm not keeping it. But at the same time, it arose when you say, hey, but why am I not keeping it?
Yeah.
So the Holy Spirit really spoke to you and asking the same question to you back and say, hey, yes, Casper, why?
Yeah.
You know, what are you doing about the Sabbath? You know, why are you putting me in the second place? So after that question, so do you think that that question was the start of changing everything for you from that point?
Yeah, and the reason why was because he shared his testimony, he shared his experience with me. And I believe that as we share our testimonies with others, this is where we can see the fingerprint of God. We can see how he was leading, taking care of them. So he just looked at me like very gently. He could see that, yeah, he hit a spot. And so he just smiled and he started to share his experience with the Sabbath with me. And so they tried to have a child on their own for some years, but biology was against them. So they decided to adopt. But to be able to adopt a child in Iceland, you have to take a course, to get a certificate, to get the approval, to start the process. But this course is always on Sabbath in the weekends. And so they decided to pray about it, and they considered this to be work. And they were like, well, this is, if it's God's will, it's his plan. He'll be faithful. So they started to pray for this every single day. But no matter what they did, they just could not see a solution, a way out. They started to talk to different people. They had talk with the commune. They even had a chat with the mayor. In the end, they saw that they could take this course in Denmark, but guess which day this would be? Also on Saturdays. So they decided to talk about it again, and they were like, no, we will continue. We'll pray, and God will come through. If he wants us to be parents, he will make the blessing for us. So long story short, they ended up having a meeting 1-to-1 privately with the Minister of Justice in Iceland. After about 8 minutes into the meeting, he stood up. He opened his coat and he gave them an envelope. And Joseph, guess what was in this envelope?
What?
The certificate. He looked them straight into the eyes and said, you know what? If anybody is worthy to become parents, it's the two of you. He shook their hand and then he left out of the door.
Wow.
And then imagine like me back in Iceland, you have the puffins, you have the small little gator blowing off some steam, all the lava stones, and you have this nice man just super happy. You can see his smile is all the way up to his ears. He starts to cry tears of joy, of appreciation. And he said, Casper, you know what? It takes about 2 years to get a kid when you have the papers in order. We got our boy within half a year. And so in that moment, in that very second, he said that I decided to leave the restaurant business, fine dining, as quick as I could. I wanted to end my contract as soon as possible, and I did, because I wanted to be authentic. I wanted to have this like Christian experience. I want to have the joy, the peace that he had, because I recognized with myself I didn't have that. I thought I did. I thought I was happy. I thought that I was living the dream because I worked in this very expensive, fancy restaurant. People would take out their phones. They would take nice picture of the food, the plates that I had done. And I took pride in that. It would literally give me a kick, like, oh yeah, I was like high-fiving myself. But everything became like nothing because I realized that I was empty inside. And the only place where I could go to be filled would be to receive the living water which only Christ can give.
Wow. That is amazing. So you ended up going ahead and quitting from your job and starting a new chapter with God where you would honor him in his Sabbath day that he commanded.
Yeah. And as I was just about to have my last exam at culinary school, my main instructor tapped me and another guy on the shoulder, and this was where the temptation came in. And it was like the devil was opening a door for me to grasp what I wanted, what I desired from my past. So we went into his office and he just looked at us and like, guys, I have this amazing opportunity for you. I just spoke literally 5 minutes ago with the best chef in Denmark. This guy, he's going to start a new fancy Michelin star restaurant where the headquarters of Lego is. He won the best chef in Denmark 2 years ago. You'll be learning everything from him. He's going to develop a new team, a new menu, everything from scratch. You'll be part of this amazing process. What do you say, guys? And the other one, my fellow classmate, he was just all excited. He was like jumping, almost like pulling off his hair of excitement. And like, oh man, amazing. Yes. And I was just very calm. I looked at my main instructor and I just said, thank you so much. I really appreciate the tap on the shoulder, but I have to decline. And my instructor, he just looked at me like his jaw dropped and like, Kasper, do you know what you're saying no to? And like, yeah, I know exactly what I'm saying no to. Because I knew that if I would go back on the same bandwagon, I would lose my connection with God again. But this time I was more committed and I knew what I had to give up from my past. To be able to work at this level, I did. You have to work more than 200 hours a month, super concentrated, super busy. I lost a lot of friends. I lost a lot of things with myself because of long work hours. You gain a lot of weight. I was very unhealthy, drinking a lot of caffeine just to keep it up because the pressure was so high. And you have this high need of drinking something like alcohol or other stimulants that will make you fall asleep. This is why so many chefs out there, they drink, they smoke weed, because this helps them to calm down so they can get like maybe 4 or 5 hours of sleep because the adrenaline, the caffeine, everything is just pumping in them. So I knew exactly what I was saying no to, but I also recognized that I would compromise my faith, and this time my identity in Christ was stronger, and I was out for an adventure with God, and I was starting to allow him to direct my journey, my life, instead of me being in the front seat.
Wow. Kasper, what an amazing testimony of how God was faithful to your life and how you responded to his faithfulness with a response of faithfulness from your part as well. Thank you so much for sharing that story with us. I will have to have you again here on the show with us so you can tell us some of your other amazing stories of what God has done into your life. But for today, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it, and we are looking forward to have you again next time with us.
Thank you.